Welcome to Crowdcreate Insights, where we connect you with some of the top thought leaders in the crypto and blockchain industry. Are you looking to land your dream job in crypto and blockchain?
All right, so today we have Alvaro. So Alvaro is head of talent at Avalanche, one of a blockchain and crypto company that's on the rise. It's all over the news right now, but Alvaro, tell us about yourself, what you're working on. And I know we've actually known each other for a long time.
Yeah, hey guys. It's great to be here. I know it's fun kind of just seeing old friends and talking about, the future, right? But no, I really appreciate you guys having us on. Recently started and came on board to help the team there with Avalanche as their full-time head of talent. Definitely a lot of growth. We launched our mainnet in September of last year, and it's been a crazy ride ever since, I'll be honest.
Yeah, Avalanche has been in the headlines, and you guys just recently announced stable coins are moving over on the Avalanche platform, and you guys are building so much momentum. But I really want to focus in, actually, the first place I want to start is yourself, Alvaro, because I know you started in your recruiting, your talent, a headhunter for some time, and you yourself, transitioned to where you are in the crypto space now. Like, how did that happen? What brought you over, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I feel like, I don't know, I always kind of look or think back to The Alchemist. I know it's probably like the oldest reference for people's books, but it's always kind of been that, like, if you truly like believe what you want and put it out there, like the world will conspire to help you, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of it is kind of like putting out that positivity, but in all honesty, I've also been extremely fortunate to just have like had some really great folks throughout my career that have shown me, or like skills that I was able to develop. And ultimately, recruiting was kind of the foundation for that. And I think around 2013, when I was really starting to get deeper into the professional world after 4 years of delivering pizza after the market crash, right? It was definitely hard times. So, I was working at a blockchain recruiting company, and Bitcoin got the attention of me and one of my coworkers. It's kind of funny. We talked recently and we look back at it. We're like, man, we were talking about buying Tesla, Bitcoin, all these companies that, of course, you regret 7-8 years later not doing, but just kind of caught on to the industry. I did actually have like my first foray into like buying Bitcoin, and it was fully speculative. I really didn't get anything about it or didn't understand it at the time, but kind of like held on for a couple of years. Of course, sold kind of early, and a couple of years later, recruiting was doing really well. I had learned a lot about leveraging technology for automation in a lot of recruiting systems and how to really like do things with the quality perspective, but using the technology to save yourself a lot of time, which eventually led me to just, opening up and starting my own firm. I think really that was like a lot of the buildup from just financial freedom kind of stuff that we would hear a lot back then, right? Like Tim Ferriss eventually led me into like Bigger Pockets was like a big one that I got onto for real estate for a while. And I mean, it was just something where I finally had the time and the bandwidth to explore. And I've always been into like really deep research recruiting. Prior to blockchain, I was always doing cancer diagnostic research, like biotech recruiting. So it's just really interesting. And we were in Thailand with a bunch of friends, I think 2017, a bunch of people from UCI actually. And it was right around the last hype cycle and everyone was going crazy. We were driving from like one place to another and there was like 26 of us just going crazy over the market every day. So it's kind of funny. Like I bought back in because of the hype and obviously got wrecked like a lot of other people. But I think like that the second time around, I was like, wow, like this keeps resurfacing. I've been a tech recruiter for a long time. I should really like, actually learn about this stuff. And, having the flexibility to recruit 4 or 5 hours a day and do really well for myself because I had learned a skill set that was more entrepreneurial and in a market that just was, high level of need. So it's very specialized, I think, at the end of the day, right?
Did
Just
you,
allowed me to like satisfy those curiosities.
yeah, did you see an increase in demand in just blockchain jobs? Is that also a part of it?
It's funny. It's kind of one of those situations where there's always been a demand. I think it's just the market at any given time is more about how many people have their eyes on it. So that was when I left my last company to start my own in 2017. It was kind of with the idea that I wanted to focus all on blockchain. And there was demand for jobs, but I quickly learned that it was just kind of really early in the market, right? Where a lot of the recruiting wasn't quite as tangible yet, unless you were really like into deep research and had a lot of like the skills. The general world just wasn't ready for it yet. And actually it was a big, point of friction for me because that's all I wanted to do was work in blockchain, but I could not find someone who wanted to hire a blockchain recruiter. There just wasn't enough kind of stuff, right? So I think obviously the coming of age moment that we're having now and the fact that institutional kind of like backing is finally pouring in, there's a lot more of that like venture capital investment coming in the door where you see a lot more of like there's always been demand, but I think now you kind of see that long standing demand where people that you would consider top 5% professionals in their industry are finally getting that attention drawn over to the blockchain side, right? Whereas before, it's like 3 years ago, you talk to a marketing manager at Nike or Apple or any of these brands that we all like, love and have the best of the best. And you just get plainly like, what's blockchain, right? So at the time, it just wasn't, even though the demand was there for building and people that wanted to create these things, I think the supply side was kind of the harder thing. And I mean, it's still the case, man. I mean, it's definitely not easy to find really talented people that know how to step into these things and drive.
Yeah. Alvaro, you brought up Tesla, and Tesla has made a lot of people rich, even early employees that were part of the company when it IPO'd. Same with Google, same with Facebook. When they IPO'd, early employees, I mean, obviously, when you're trying to land your dream job in crypto and blockchain, the benefits are, you can go to the moon and you can get paid very financially well by being a part of this company. I know that we had a conversation too, just kind of walk through why somebody would want to jump onto, being a part of rebuilding the internet, being the next Google, the next Nike for blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's for a lot of people, it's just that sense of history, right? And I think it's a theme that I hear like over and over again when I hear podcasts, but it's right. The people are right. I think our generation grew up where you still had the dial up, not the super early days of the internet, but you remember when it was like Google and Yahoo and all these things, right? And I mean, it really feels like we're in that 1994 to 1996 kind of like time frame where the internet was just catching on. And Web 3.0 blockchain is just really like a technological, disruptor when it comes to all that. So I think for most people, it's always that volatility that you hear about, or you're not certain that it's going to be a stable kind of place to be, which has always been the risk. But that's exactly where you find the reward, right? When you find, the company that you're going to attach yourself to and is going to really end up not just thriving through the market, but surviving, right? You always kind of look at any investment vehicle and you kind of know that 95% of it is going to fail, right? But really it's that excitement of like building the future, right? People that are really mission driven, and yes, kind of like the personal growth goes a long way. And that's always a big topic for recruiting because you're dealing with people's careers and personal lives, right? It is a very personal thing, but ultimately it's not the easiest thing to do when you're going from that, like, I mean, and it's not exactly exactly exact kind of analogy, but it's kind of that 0 to 1 moment, right? Like if it hasn't been done before, it really takes a certain type of drive or passion to kind of live with that problem and be there every day. So I think first and foremost, it's just wanting to get that experience of like what's coming up next. You know, I'm curious about the technology. I want to be a part of shaping that future. But then there's the other components of it too, right? Like, who doesn't wish they joined Google in 1994? Who doesn't wish they joined Tesla or SpaceX, like, you know, right when we were kind of getting out of school and doing our thing, right?
That's in hindsight. Like, we know now, we know Google, we know Amazon, and let's say if you know, applicant or, you know, someone looking for a job has already made that mental jump that he or she wants to get into blockchain, but then now there's the other issue. There's a billion, you know, crypto startups left and right, and it's funny because, you know, a little while ago it used to be just white paper, but now they're legitimate, well-funded, amazing projects. How do you, like, what do you tell someone, you know, how do you find the right company to work for here?
Yeah, Alvaro, almost you're very good at what you do, being a head of talent. If, you know, we were a head of marketing person at Nike or Apple, and you're bringing that person over to Avalanche, like what would it sound like, the conversation, and why actually would be the big draw?
I mean, like, I've been a fan of Nike since, you know, the first time I saw Michael Jordan, like, on TV in the mid 90s, you know, so like, if I'm talking to someone from a firm like that, I'm like literally coming at it from the perspective of, you know, our founders and our teams have built this amazing product, right? We have the waffle racer soul that revolutionized Nike. As a marketing professional, like, we're looking for that Whedon and Kennedy moment where if you can come in there and, you know, come up with that just do it moment, like, how long lasting and how impactful is that, right? There's very few moments in history where things come to a point that end up affecting a huge outburst of things later. And usually it's people that have really good timing, right? Like Steve Jobs, Apple Computer, right? Like, a lot of that backstory is timing, where he was, his experiences that he happened to share. My being fortunate enough to land at a place like Avalanche is actually a really funny story that we'll talk about another time, but it was definitely a component of me being proactive in what I wanted to learn and meeting the right person, being in the right place at the right time. And really, that's kind of the excitement here, right? Is this my moment where, in hindsight, 10 years later, I'm going to be looking back and say, I'm glad I did, right? It's like, you always have that fear-based kind of like approach to job searches and careers where it's like, I need stability, I need this. And there's so many factors that are so nuanced and personal. But for me, it's always just looking at that like abundance side of the mentality, right? Sure, a lot can go wrong, but I just like to think about all the things that can go right. And at the end of the day, you know, I think for any company that's trying to drive a very like idealistic and very like big kind of task, as big as decentralization is, you kind of have to have that desire to be there in that moment, right? And I think that's really kind of the big sell for anybody going into any blockchain company. You know, nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows who's going to do well. But at the end of the day, like, this is a moment to seize, and there's only a certain amount of time to do it, right?
That's good.
Yeah, I actually get asked this a lot because there's a lot of developers in my friend network, and they're always asking, like, how do I like, what are those indicators of a company that I should join in the blockchain space?
Yeah, that's huge, man. Because to be honest, like, I think the place where I really learned that skill was running my own contingency business, right? And I think any like business owner or founder would know this, but like, when you're trying to build and you have that whole like, you know, building the parachute while you're skydiving, or any analogy that you can think of in that fashion, you really have to make decisions on where to spend your time, right? And especially for me being a contingent recruiter, I couldn't like disillusion myself with clients that ultimately weren't going to work out for one reason or another. And it was a skill. Like, a lot of folks that, you know, kind of mentored me a lot early in my career would always say this, and it didn't click until I went through all the experiences that I never wanted to go through again. But, you know, recruiters get a bad rap, and
No, I think Alvaro froze there. It jumps back on. Jeff, I shared with you the list, but we can edit this part out.
Yeah.
Alvaro. You can hear me fine, Jeff? It's not mine?
Yep. Maybe Ivan, if you can lead with that one, the one that I just posted there.
Okay.
What are you?
Top tips. I'm just trying to think of really relevant things because literally I have these conversations like all the time with developers like Dan and Jessica just last night. Why aren't you guys getting in blockchain? Like, what skill sets do we need? Do we need to learn what? Solidity? What's the work pace like? Okay, Alvaro's coming back in. I'll open with that 3 tips.
Hey, we ran
Alvaro,
out of
you're
time.
back.
Yeah, what happened? I got dropped off.
Okay, let me remove the other Alvaro.
Oh, there's
Actually,
two.
I gotta send you this screenshot here. There's the other one.
Sorry, my bad. I'm cut out halfway on you guys.
It's okay. No, I can continue.
That'll be good because that was super long-winded. I'll just give you the short answer whenever we pick it up.
Okay,
you know,
we're good.
Alvaro, I want to share this. It's a tool. So, you know, focusing on crypto and blockchain jobs, these are the questions that people are asking about crypto jobs, like how to get a job in crypto, how to get paid. I'm sure compensation packages. You know, they also talk about cities. You know, where are crypto jobs in London, Miami? But yeah, I guess, you know, for somebody looking for a job in crypto, what are the top 3 tips you recommend for somebody trying to land their dream job?
Dream job. It depends. Figure out where you're starting. I think that's always the main thing. You know, expectations are probably the biggest disappointment when it all comes down to it, right? Or what leads to the most disappointment. So I think first and foremost, it's like being realistic about where you are, right? Trying to figure out the types of companies that you're going to want to work for is always a good first step. And looking at the people that work there already, you know, are there folks that have similar backgrounds to mine? Do I see other people in the industry already doing it? And I think one thing that's important there is that like hiring is always a two-way street, right? So one of the most difficult things to go through with the hiring kind of conversation is that a lot of times people are really talented and you know they can do the job, but ultimately as a recruiter, you're not making the decisions. There is someone on the other side trying to figure out or looking for something that they think is the right fit. So kind of going that route and getting an indicator for people that are out there first is always a good way to figure out which types of companies are going to be realistic for you in that first step, right? Because at the end of the day, the reality is most companies want to hire people that come on board with a certain skill set. And it's very difficult, right? It's always that paradox of I need experience, but I can't get the job. So it's kind of like, it's a decision tree, right? First and foremost, is there someone exactly like me? Right. And that'll usually give me the confidence that that's a good place where I might likely get a job. 2 is if I don't have the skills, are there places where I can get a job with the skills that I do have and work in a smaller startup environment where people tend to wear more hats, right? So by leveraging your current skill set and going into an environment where you're going to pick up stuff through osmosis, you can really like fast track your understanding of a certain industry, a certain product, or just, you know, the new avenues you want to take by generally offering the skill set that you have, you know. And the final thing is for like what I had to do for a while, because again, the industry wasn't ready, And a lot of blockchain projects are very open source, right? So they're not necessarily hiring a team where they have a comp package and a salary for you. But I started diving into the Discord, places where all the projects that I was interested in were living, and literally like reaching out to the admins and reaching out to the project leaders, because for a lot of smaller ones, the founder and the coders are right there in the Discord. I don't know how many recruiters have to pay how much money, or every professional does, just to get access to certain LinkedIn kind of folks, right? That's an asset that, much like everything else in blockchain, the whole like concept of decentralization opens up a whole world that a lot of us just don't have access to. And that includes experience with jobs. If you talk to a founder and you're a social media manager, a lot of them are going to be happy to have another person with that skill set helping spread the word about their project, right? So I think for a lot of things, and this is maybe a cultural thing for me too, growing up, I had to ask permission for everything, right? But the thing that really grasps me for jobs and developing your space within blockchain is that it's permissionless, right? There is nobody to ask. There is an open world where people have this outlook and view of like, it's a village concept. Let's raise it all together, right? So when nobody else was giving me a shot, I found a place to get it myself,
Nice.
Wow. The way you said it, it's interesting because the experience that people come with now from blockchain spaces, a lot of this technology is brand new. You don't have someone with 10 years experience in Solidity or something like that. So does that make it a more open opportunity for people trying to get in?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Like it's a whole new like foundational kind of shift in just the way like systems and software is developed that is very interesting. I'll have applicants for like smart contract jobs that are a year out of college, and they're not like the most confident person. They just love smart contracts and blockchain, but they'll come to an interview and I get a lot of feedback where like, I don't know if they were confident enough to like work with our candidates, but weirdly enough, they had one of the best like technical assessments, right? So like, unless you've actually been working in like peer-to-peer streaming or distributed system type technologies, most people code to one server or like a cloud environment where peer-to-peer like networks just aren't really like a mental like obstacle you've had to go through, right? So for a lot of people that are just getting into it, some of the more impressive like developers are younger out of college folks that studied all this in school, no computer science, and just have never had to make that mental shift, so they're going into it that exact way, right? So yeah, I mean, it's so early where it's very interesting like how you can calibrate like actual experience. It's very unique. You have to get very creative with that for sure.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people that are looking into doing like on the software development side, and they're always wondering, because software development, it's like really notorious for those difficult entrance tests that take like 5 hours and they have homework. Is it the same with the blockchain community?
I don't think it is everywhere. And like being frank and transparent as a recruiting like professional, I've never really liked those tests either, in the same way that I know a lot of software engineers don't. But
Yeah.
I think it depends, right? Like I've seen it done for varying reasons and varying ways, where I think it's like anything else in like life, right? It's very nuanced. It's all about perspective and the reasoning why. So there are a lot where I've seen like organizations that really, maybe their first hire, they don't know how to assess tech because they're not a technical founder. So they use things like HackerRank that are a little more like textbook oriented, and people can do really well if they've been like brushing up on their computer science. But in reality, it doesn't always reflect like real world scenarios and the types of things you come across in a real coding environment, right? So I totally get that kind of perspective, but coming from a business standpoint, sometimes, not every founder is a engineer, in the same way that not every technical founder is a marketer, right? So there's kind of a component there of how bad do you want it, or how much does it make sense for you to actually do that, right? And I'll be honest, for us at Ava Labs, that's actually something that we have to do right now. Our technical team does it in a different way. They've created a lot of custom assessments. One of the things we do is we generate code so that people can like access our testnet, write a smart contract, deploy it, and they actually get access to all the tools that all our developers have and people in our incubator. So it can be pretty cool when you do it that way, and it's actually made to like work a certain way. Of course, most people that are just flocked with opportunity don't care to take the time or even look at it. But I also have people that come back and say, wow, that taught me a lot. I may not have like knocked it out of the park, but I actually got to deploy on a test net, right? So I think the trade-off for us right now is that ideally that'll change in the long run. But what people don't realize as well, and it's not like very public facing, but the company's almost tripled in size since the mainnet launched. And with all the activity and things that are going on, we're looking to do that again in the next year. So unfortunately, when it comes down to deciding between the time of a VP of engineering and folks that are literally having to support these like test nets and main nets, and we launched an exchange a couple of months ago, and we also have all these partnerships that you're now starting to see with Tether and Bifrost and Chainlink in the last week. But I mean, with everything coming up, I think the world's going to start to open up and really see a lot of what Avalanche really has been doing, not just in the 3 years that they've established the company, but in the 20 years that our founder has really been like a researcher for the space. So I think, coming in, like even being hired as their head of talent, one of my first kind of perspectives was, we're hiring quickly. We just need to know folks that know what good talent looks like and have a bunch of conversations. But coming in there and literally spending a week with this team, like you kind of start to see the challenges that they're facing and the things that they're having to work on. So for them, like after kind of like going through that more nuanced situation and figuring out like, where do you prioritize, right? Of course, we would love to spend time with every distributed systems engineer that is awesome at that and wants to do blockchain, and without having to ask them to do any type of coding assessment. But the reality is there's a lot of folks that look great on paper and will disappoint you when it really comes down to it. There's a lot of folks that just don't necessarily meet the type of profile that you need when you're at that phase of the company, right? One thing I'd always hear in recruiting was like, there's a butt for every seat and there's a seat for every butt, right? Like, and that's kind of like it goes both ways again, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that, someone won't be great at an Avalanche 3 months from now when we have a little more structure, and those assessments won't go away when it finally makes sense to. But looking at it from the perspective of like what they have to lose if something goes wrong, from like the value proposition that they feel they've built in the technology, that's obviously a trade-off that you have to make, right? So as much as we want to open that up and make it easier for folks, in some cases it's really difficult to, and I hate asking, to be honest, right? Like I hate having to sit in a call and be like, hey, here's these things I'm going to ask you to do for a maybe. But I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to recruiting style too, where I see a lot of organizations that'll just get an application and send that out right away. Where like, I think if you're going to ask someone to do that, you got to kind of offer up that value proposition, right? Because like for me, the people we want to hire are not necessarily like, they don't have the time to do these assessments. They're top 5, 10, 15% professionals in their respective fields, and they're doing a lot already. And look, I've looked at my developers inboxes on LinkedIn, like it's crazy. You see like 30, 40 messages a week, or if not a day, right?
So Alvaro, that's interesting, because it almost shows that, well, where you are, you're the head of talent at Avalanche, and like you're sitting on the other side where these job applicants are trying to get a job at Avalanche, and you're saying that you're getting a lot of talent flowing in. So I would actually ask you, like, what would you tell a candidate, like what you should do to prepare for a job at Avalanche, and also the flip side is like, why Avalanche?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult to do, right? Because like at the end of the day, like when it really comes down to assessing skill sets, like I'm not an engineer, I'm not a marketer. So if I try to really do that in an interview myself, I'm punching way above my weight and I know it. That's not what good recruiting is about. When I say like you're here to offer that value proposition, all that really means is seeing the right connections, taking the time to really, be proactive about getting on those people's radars. And before I ask anything of any developer, time willing, I'm usually spending about 6, 7 hours on the phone just answering questions about what is Avalanche? How does the platform work? And the reason I do that is because when it really comes down to attracting top tier talent, you essentially have to help in doing the fast track for that research because look, you don't get Michael Jordan out of the Bulls unless you have a really good value proposition, right? So in order to do that, it's almost like, hey, look, like I have to impress you first. And again, nuanced, right? The Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world probably don't have to do that anymore. But the reality for me is that we do want top talent. There is a lot of noise out there vying for your attention. And at the end of the day, I don't expect you to know who Avalanche is yet. We're only 8 months old. We're making noise, but hey, like your skill set brings just as much value to this industry and growth as a company does. So it's not about, how do we screen? How do we do that? Ideally, the best kind of recruiting processes are set up to spend more time trying to figure out how we do make it happen, right? So what I would tell a candidate is like, go out there. I think the main kind of like mentality that you should have is and I hear this a lot. This is actually one of the biggest points, and I find myself saying it a lot now, but everyone is talented. They say, I'm capable and I'm ready to learn. I can hit the ground running. Sure, that's going to work in a lot of different scenarios. But if you're literally trying to reach the Apples, the Googles, the Nikes of the next generation of the internet, it's a little bit of a different mentality where you're kind of running toward the starting line, right? As opposed to hitting that ground running. And ever since I heard that phrase, a good friend of mine, Blake Baxter, said that. And I was like, that totally makes sense, right? When I came in and was hired at Avalanche, I just used my example because I lived it, right? Didn't really know much about who they were, kind of came across it because my wife is a cancer nurse and treated one of the director's mothers for cancer. So we had like this connection. I was looking to stake a node. So for me, I was already researching them, not knowing anything much more about it. But flash forward 1 week from that phone call, and I find myself like figuring out if it's time to shut down my independent recruiting company, right? But for me, it was a very proactive kind of situation where before those calls happened, anything, I literally put my life aside for a week because I started to realize this is something that I should really look into. So, I think the more you can do that racing to the starting line, candidates that I see being successful, not even just in new industries, even when you're coming into like a very critical position at an already established company, people want to know that you have a game plan going in there, right? So I know when I had my conversations with folks, I was doing all the work ahead of time to go into that and say, look, here's why I'm the right person to help you do this. And here are the examples for why I've done it. And like, that's the hardest thing to do is to cater your conversation and resource to like a one conversation, right?
Yeah.
I think
Thanks,
the biggest
Alvaro.
thing is filtering that out.
We're gonna chop this up and make it as because usually we do like 15-minute episodes. But yeah, any closing thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah,
Kind
man.
of
Good
wrap it
luck
up.
editing. Sorry, I talk a lot. But I think one thing I didn't hit on was those points of like how you identify a good company, right? So for me, it's always been, is it a good founding team? Have they done it before is a big bonus if they've already kind of shown that they've been able to bring a company from, startup to IPO or whatever your personal goal is. 2, do they have funding and runway so that you're actually, joining a company where you're going to expect to be a year from now? And 3, is it something that you'd be passionate about? If you
That's good.
wouldn't see yourself working there without any extra benefits or pay, then it's really not something that's driving you from like the core of your interest. It's more about the money. So you want to remove that as much as you can.
Nice.
You know something you're passionate about, you have a founding team that you believe in, great product, great funding. Usually that's a very good mix to kind of have that confidence. Of course, there's the unicorns and the folks that come out of nowhere out there, but if you're already someone that's doing good things and you need to kind of like source through the noise to really get to the things that matter, I think those few points are usually some good things to look at.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Alvaro. I appreciate it. Ivan, maybe you can just add this in there. From my side, just to kind of provide insights on how you can land your dream job in crypto. We notice a lot of companies have large treasury funds now. Our biggest recommendation is to get involved as possible with the project, joining their hackathons, joining their community events. We hear about Coinbase's first employee, Olaf, cold emailing the founder, talking about how he can help with the platform, any suggestions on what can be improved with user experience, with marketing, with software development and whatnot. And in general, just put yourself out there. First, become a user of the product, as opposed to just sending out your application to as many jobs and listings as possible, because it's a marathon, not a sprint with some of these companies. And just like Alvaro said, wherever you're going to be years out from today is going to make all the difference with you being successful, whatever company it may be. So thanks, Alvaro.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.